Off so that I hold it in my hands. Good evening to you. I'm Gift Sanyanga. I'm coming from Mutarese. I arrived yesterday. I know quite a number of faces here, some of whom I have met before. We did a research. I think proceeding this research, there were some debates that were done before here. And one time there was a journalist who came from Zimbabwe. He's a journalist who reports mostly on environmental and climate issues, on climate change. So from the debates, one issue that came out was the issue of climate refugees. People are being displaced from places where they used to stay and moving to other places because of the effects of climate change. So it was agreed that we do a research in Mutarese, an agenda setting research, to try and verify whether indeed there are people that are moving from their places that they used to stay to new places because of they are being affected by environment. So what I'm going to present to you is just a rundown of how we proceeded with the research, what we did, what came out, what were the research questions, what came out, and what were the findings, and what are the conclusions that we made from the research. When I talked to Dick earlier, he thought he was going to go through the first parts of the presentation, and then I continue. I don't know whether it's still the same thing or I can continue. So
you can use the clicker to go through your presentation.
Okay. So Dick, can I proceed, or you want to say one or two things before?
Shall I see it for the first 3 slides?
Yeah.
Even kijken. Ja, this is the report that is made in Mutarese, and it was very good. It's called an agenda setting research because we use it here for awareness, but we will use it in Mutarese to raise this problem. It was made in August with people from Haarlem and people from Mutarese, and Gift, even kijken. And Gift, he arrived yesterday and he leaves next Thursday, and in the meantime he will have talks with the VNG International and with the Max van der Stoel Foundation, who are organizing every year the Africa Day. And Africa Day is the next year on climate and climate change, and they will invite Gift. And I see the slides going automatically. This is the climate debate that we organized, the first 3, and this was the first, in which Mr. Andrew Mambondyani made us aware of the problem of climate refugees in Mutarese and in Zimbabwe. And he is a very well-known journalist, and he made a report about the problems in Beira. And the problem was that he was there 2 weeks before Idai flooded completely Beira. So that made his point why it's necessary to do something about climate change. And in Haarlem we had 2 more debates. And here you see a map of Southern Africa with the dot of Mutarese. And in Mutarese, the investigation was done. And this is Mutarese itself. Like Haarlem, it is a provincial capital of the province of Manicaland. And when the city link started, we had in Haarlem 150,000 people, and in Mutarese also 150,000. At the moment, we have in Mutarese 250,000 people, and in Haarlem 150,000, so it really grows very rapidly, Mutarese, but it's very well maintained, and we like to keep it that way. And So, and this is my part of the introduction, and then I give the floor to Gift.
Thank you, Dick. I'm going to proceed with the rest of the presentation, which is looking basically into the research that we did. This is just a picture of some fire burnings in Manicaland in Mutare. The research was based on the questions that were developed there. The first one being the issue of how precipitation is developing in Southern Africa. And also the second one being on the issues of climate change, on drought, the frequency and the occurrence of droughts, is it increasing or is it decreasing? And then there was the issue of the question on the demographic developments upon migration from dry parts to moist parts. Who are the people moving, and what is the cause of those people that are moving? And whether our government, the government of Zimbabwe, sees that as a problem, and are there methods to respond to the adaptation strategies to respond to the issue of climate change. I'm glad the speaker who spoke before me mentioned that yes, climate change is there, but also there are shortfalls sometimes due to bad governance, especially when we talk about issues of adaptation strategies. That's where the issue of bad governance comes clear, because climate change is a phenomenon which is affecting the whole globe, but some governments are able to cope with it, but some governments are not able to cope with it because of the issues of governance. How did we proceed with this? So the methodology is basically a qualitative approach that we used in the study. And we purposely assembled villages in areas that we know that were reported before by Andrew Mambondyani. He highlighted the issue of some areas that were receiving climate refugees. So we purposefully assembled those areas, because the areas that the climate refugees were moving into. And we proceeded by doing some interviews, face-to-face interviews with people who were moving to those areas. We ruled out the issue of questionnaires because people will not respond, because it's a sensitive area. As you know, one of the major limiting factors is that the area is sensitive, because these are people who are moving to areas illegally. So they are facing a lot of challenges, including threats of evictions, some other conflicts that are coming up. So the only way we could get information from them was through face-to-face interviews. And also we had some key informants, which included some government officials from the local government and an environmental management agency, which looks at issues of the environment in Zimbabwe. It's called EMA, Environmental Management Agency in Zimbabwe. So those were our key informants. The major limiting factor, like I mentioned earlier, is that the issue is a bit sensitive. So you find that most of the people that we had to use interviews through the village setups, through the headmen, because people were not forthcoming to openly talk about the issue. Okay. Am I at the right slide? Okay. The study area. Mutare, I think Mutare is as mentioned by Dick, Mutare is the provincial city of Manicaland. So it's surrounded, it's 2,000 meters above sea level. It's surrounded by areas that receive fairly good rainfall, areas that are fairly fertile, areas that are fairly attractive for people who want better prospects, especially in farming. And Bema Valley and Mpunzi resettlement areas are two of the areas that we considered for the research. Bema Valley is to the east of Mutare. It's about 50 kilometers to the east of Mutare, and it's bordering Mozambique. And Mpunzi is to the south of Mutare. It's again 50 kilometers to the south of Mutare. And these areas are mountainous. These areas, they fairly receive high precipitation every year, unlike the other parts of the country where you find that rain, even in a year where you receive average or close to average rainfall, or in an area where you don't receive any good rainfall, these areas normally they receive better rainfall. Sometimes categorized as relief rainfall because they are mountainous. They receive fairly good rainfall, so they are attractive areas to move, particularly for farming and for livestock rearing. So these are the two areas that we considered for the study of the issue of climate refugees, because people are moving from dry pass to settle in these two areas, Bema Valley with the 3 villages and Mpunzi resettlement area. This is a typical a new homestead that is established in one of the areas. You see it's in a mountainous area. You can also see the type of houses that they are more like temporary houses. So these are people who have relocated there particularly to do farming. You can see that they have cleared part of the land where they built their homestead, and they are farming around their homestead. But the other areas, you can still see trees that are there. What did we find from the research? Having gone through the interviews and everything, interviewing also the key informants, we discovered that on the issue of the development of the climate, there is increased frequency and intensity of droughts. Droughts are happening more frequently, and they are getting more and more severe. The precipitation is getting less and less, as you can see from the second point there. Those are only years that have been identified where it was severe drought. The other years that are not mentioned there might have been a bit of precipitation, but not necessarily a good rainfall season. So those were severe drought areas. 1993, 94, 2001, 2002, 2003, you can see the rest of the year, even this past year, 2018, 2019. So the other issue that came out is that there is a relatively, as mentioned by the former speaker, there is relatively a high rise in temperature. Globally, it's like, say, the 1% increase in global temperature, but in Southern Africa, it's about 2%. So the relative to other parts of the world, there is a rise in temperature. And then because of those developments, those climatic changes, there are far-reaching consequences for water supply, food production, livestock, and electricity production. As I'm speaking to you now, if you go to Zimbabwe today, of the 24 hours a day, probably you get electricity for only 4 hours. The other 20 hours, there is no electricity. Some people were trying to Skype with me when we were doing the research, but I said, you cannot reach me because there is no electricity. Because the water level in our main dam that supplies electricity has gone down. And during this current drought, the 2018-2019, about 4.1 million people were left food insecure. So the other extreme end is also, we also receive a lot of rainfall, like the cyclone Idai that most happened, which is the other extreme end of the climate change. Either you get droughts, like I highlighted before, and then in some instances, you get a lot of rainfall and cyclones. They die, and the massive destruction it caused, the loss of life, loss of property. It's again the effect of the cyclone, of the climate change. So those are the far-reaching consequences. Water has become scarce. Food production, there is a lot of food. People are not guaranteed of food, of food security. You find, like mentioned, also again, let me refer to the previous speaker, most of the people who stay in the communal areas, they are subsistence farmers. They basically grow for their own food for consumption. They don't buy, they grow their own maize, they try to grow, they rear their own livestock, which food they use for eating. And now because of climate change, they are not guaranteed of a good harvest. They are not guaranteed that their livestock will live. Some of them, they die during drought years. So these people are tempted to leave those drier parts of the country, seeking places where there is a better prospect of farming and where they can also rear their livestock. And then on the issue of the findings on the demographic issues, the refugees, they come from the dry parts of Manicaland, mostly, of which Mutarese is the capital. Most of the refugees that are coming to Bema Valley, because they are not coming from the other parts of Zimbabwe, like Mashola Land, Matebela Land. They are coming mostly from the dry parts of the Manicaland province. There are exceptional cases. One case we noted where a person came from Mount Darwin, which is Mashonaland, but in the majority of cases, people are coming from the dry part of Manicaland. And the reason for their migrating is they are attracted by the fertile soils that are prominent in these areas that we are researching on, and also better prospects of farming. And as highlighted by Dick, when the seedling started, the population of Haarlem and Mutare was like 50,000, but Zimbabwe now, and in Mutare now is 250,000, and Haarlem is 150,000. So there is the issue of population growth. We still have families that are having many children. We still have some religious sects where people marry many wives. So you discover a homestead where a husband has many wives and many children. Some grown-up sons or daughters, they want to start their own families. They cannot have enough space there. And we're sent by a situation that those areas are drought. There is nothing much coming from the fields. So these people, they want to start their own families. They move away from those dry parts and they want to start their own families. And they normally look at areas like Mpuzi and Bema Valley, where there are better farming opportunities. So the issue of overpopulation is also a contributing factor to climate migration, because the soils are poorer, there are droughts there, then they move to better places, and also finding a home. And we also discovered that most of the refugees are in their 30s. They are starting their own families. They are in their 30s, so there are people who are starting their own families, people who have young families. Those are the most people that we find on the issue of demographics. And then on the impacts of the migration, we categorize them into two: the environmental impacts and the social impacts. These people, when they move to those areas, there is a lot of deforestation happening. They want to clear a lot of forest area so that they can do their farming practices. And we also know how deforestation contributes to climate change because of those forests. They are very good at absorbing some of the carbon dioxide. But because of deforestation, they cut down the trees to clear the trees for their farming. They also start wildfires. They burn some of the trees that they have cleared. And those wildfires that they start, sometimes they fail to control them. And they spread all over many places. They also do bad farming practices, like farming on stream banks, on mountain slopes. And then soil erosion and siltation of rivers is a common occurrence. Because of people moving there, there is also an over-exploitation of the natural resources. The numbers of people that are moving there are also increasing, so that there is too much demand upon the natural resources because of the population increase. Then the social impacts is there are also conflicts between the refugees, the climate refugees, and the people who are legally settled around those areas that they are moving to. They are not moving to places that are in isolation. For example, Bema Valley is very close to Leopard Rock. It borders Leopard Rock, which is a resort city, and Leopard Rock is a game park. There are also farmers that are close by who grow bananas. So you find when the refugees move there, they sometimes encroach into areas that are owned by the resort center, by Leopard Rock, or areas that are partly owned by the banana farmers. So there is a lot of conflict. Sometimes their houses are burnt. Sometimes, like Leopard Rock, one of the issues is actually a pending court issue. They have presented the court so that those people are evicted because they are affecting their tourism business. So there are lots of conflicts. And also with some other villagers who stay by. The climate refugees are moving into areas that some of the people staying there are using as their grazing lands for their livestock. So that creates, again, conflict. So there is a lot of conflict which is emanating because of the climate refugees moving into those areas that we were studying. This is an example of a wildfire which was left uncontrolled. It's burning along the roads beyond even the area that the climate refugees want to do their farming. On the government's position, yes, the government of Zimbabwe sees this as a problem. They want to evict the refugees, and they need to find alternative space for the refugees. That's what they told us. From interviewing the government officials, they see that as truly a problem. But they don't have an alternative space for them. They want to find an alternative space for them. And after finding an alternative space for them, then they proceed with evicting them. On that point again, there is the land audit that they are currently doing, especially after the land reform program. There is a lot of land that they want to undertake a land audit to see how the land is being utilized. So after the land audit, then probably they'll know where they can alternatively place the refugees. Then the adaptation measures. That's where the issue of bad governance comes in. These things, sometimes they are written on paper, but on the ground, you find that they are far away from being implemented. one of the adaptation measures that was implemented by NGOs in collaboration with the Ministry of Agriculture was a program that they called Dig Ugute, dig and harvest enough, where it's very labor intensive. So most people were not willing to go for it because you cannot use any other form of labor except human labor. You dig a small patch, you plant your seed there, you manure it, whether it's organic or other kinds of manure, you water it, it contains moisture there. There are, through that, even in a drought, you can harvest something, but the problem is it's a very labor-intensive adaptation measure. So most communal people were not willing to adapt it. And also the other second adaptation measure that was considered was the issue of drought-resistant crops, such as sorghum. But basically, Zimbabweans, like most Southern African countries, they mostly grow maize. Maize is the staple food. So changing people's staple food to sorghum, people are not very much forthcoming. The government tried to provide them with farming implements, hoes and seeds, so that people are promoted to grow drought-resistant crops. But they are not the staple food that people want. People want mostly maize, and maize is one of the crops that is highly affected by high temperatures. 1% loss in production with just temperatures of 30 degrees and above on a day. So that was one of the adaptive measures that was considered. Irrigation schemes as a drought mitigation scheme was considered. But again, it has its own challenges, the capacity and also the political will, and coupled by issue of poor government measures also, how to ensure food security for their people. I think you can agree with me, basically the cause of most migration is the issue of food insecurity, which of course was affected by the land reform program and worsened by the issue of the climate change. So the government is failing to secure food for its people through probably putting commercial farming and also providing irrigation schemes. So without food insecurity, with food insecurity, people are prompted to look for alternatives, and the climate refugees are one of the things. So irrigation schemes are one of the adaptive measures that is used. This is a community gathering, people complaining, meeting, and complaining about the issue of climate refugees who are invading their grazing lands. And that's one of the ways where issues are debated and discussed on how to get around it. Based on this study, what do we recommend after the study? We recommend that the government should step up its efforts regarding climate change adaptation. The government has to step up on adaptation strategies. Capacity is another issue, but they have to step up on dealing with adaptation strategies. And then the government should also expand drought mitigation strategies. For example, developing irrigation schemes in drier areas so that people are not prompted to move to new areas and avoid all the environmental, the social conflicts. When irrigation schemes are introduced in the drier parts of the country, it will help contain the movement of people. We also recommend that the government should prioritize development of irrigation schemes before or immediately after resettling the refugees back in the areas where they came from. Because, like we mentioned, that the government is aware that this is a problem. The government wants to relocate them. But if you relocate them to an area without adaptive strategies like irrigation schemes, those people are bound to move again. So it will become a vicious circle. People being evicted, moving back, being evicted and moving back. So there is need to really put in place some irrigation schemes in the areas where the people are moving from. The resettling of refugees should not only involve those in legal settlement, but also those whose relatives in moist areas pass on land to them, or those who resettled by headmen in controversial areas. What this point is trying to drive home is there are people who are moving from dry pass to the areas that we have identified. But there are also cases where people in the locality of Bema Valley and Impozi, they see people coming from other parts. Those people are also tempted to also go and claim some piece of land. So this is what we are talking about. So it should not only look at people who are moving from the dry parts, but it should also look at people who are moving even from closer areas, who are taking advantage of other people who are moving onto this land, and they also go there. And also the issue of politics must not interfere with the education and the climate adaptation strategies. Politics Yes, they are there, but politics must not also interfere with development, which is a case in our country where you can hardly differentiate politics from developmental issues. So politics must play its role, but not affect developmental issues and climate adaptation strategies. The legal occupants of invaded areas by environmental refugees should quickly seek legal means for evicting them instead of resorting to violence. Like I mentioned to you earlier, one time some of the illegal refugees, their homes were burnt down. So we propose that they should, through the court system, have those people evicted. And this will help to deter potential environmental refugees from invading the same area. This is a basic rundown of the research that we did, how we did it, how we came up with the areas, the findings, and the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to start off, because we still have some room for a couple of questions from the audience, but I need to make sure that the timeline stays right. Yeah. Sorry about that. But one of the things that I was wondering about, did some of the conclusions from the research come up as a surprise? Like one of the things that I understood earlier on about climate refugees is that people travel over long stretches of land. But one of the things that you concluded is that the majority of climate refugees are people fleeing within the region. Yeah. Was that a surprise?
Yeah, it was something that we discovered. We didn't know where these people were exactly coming from. We thought probably they were coming from all over the country. But after the research, we discovered that no, most people were actually coming from regions within the province.
Okay. I will come up to you, Marnix, because that's one of the advantages of streaming. We have to everyone talk through a microphone.
Well, it's hard to imagine how the distances are in the district. So from how far did they come?
Yeah, Manicaland is basically, I think, probably the widest area in Manicaland. You are talking about at most 100 kilometers. So it's within the peripheries of Manicaland. But some areas have been identified. Some areas are as close as 30 kilometers. Some areas are as close as 40 kilometers. So within the peripheries of Manicaland. So we are talking of 100 kilometers and less.
Well, I have another question. Did the people you talked to, did they consider themselves as climate refugees?
The term to them was new. If you read from the research, even from the verbatim, it's translating what they answered. They simply said, we are looking for survival. We want to survive. In the areas that we are living, we cannot survive with our children. So we are looking for survival. It's a means of survival.
But lacking rain, mainly.
Yeah, survival because where they were living, they could not survive because there was no good rain, no good farming perspectives. So moving to these areas, to them was an adaptive measure for climate change. They wanted to survive.
Okay, thank you. Is there another question from the audience? I don't see. Yep, usually.
Was it easy to interview residents on this problem?
Yeah, it was not easy. It was not easy. Some people were initially they were actually very resistant because they were not sure of the motive for us asking them questions. We wanted to find out the situation, but to them, they thought probably it's a mechanism for them to be identified and be evicted. So we had to go through the community leaders. So they are the people who actually helped us to finally interview most of the climate refugees.
Okay, thank you. I think that now it's time for you to hand over the report. I asked two people to come to the front. I ask Ernst-Jan Stroes, sorry, didn't have my glasses with me, and Jur Botter to come on stage, please.
Yeah, so this is the full report. You'll find more in it. There are more than what I explained, but there is more in it. So we are glad to hand over the findings of the report. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, that was done pretty quickly. And then it's a bit of a nasty question of me, but what are you going to do with it? Are you going to read it?
Yeah, actually, yes. Surely, I'm very interested in this issue, and we, as Wilde Ganzen, we are a development organization with a seat in Hilversum, and we finance a variety of projects, but the focus on climate change is evidently one that we will have in the coming time, and this does not only touch Mutare, but as well other areas in Africa where we support projects. Yeah.
Thank you. And you? Are you going to read it tonight?
As a matter of fact, I've already read something about it. I got it in advance, so I've read it, and I will hand it over to our alderman in charge of environment and the sustainability. But what I wonder is, as a matter of fact, I'm here because I was the last holiday in Africa, in the southern part of Africa, and I've noticed how severe the drought is in many circumstances, not only for people but also for the animals who don't know their way anymore and die in very severe numbers. But what you also see is that there are a lot of people now in the beddings of the rivers are starting to grow crops by themselves, and they go there every morning to give it water from the rivers, especially in the northern part of Namibia and Zambia. But what I wonder is that there was one remark made that the government officials should not intervene with the education of the agricultural adaptation. And I wonder if they are supposed to interfere, who will interfere? Who will take the lead to take measures in this, as written in this proposal or in this research? Okay. You understand what I...
Yeah, I get the issue of the interference by government on the work of the agricultural extension officers. Yes. Stream bank cultivation, I don't think is a good agricultural practice because it has other effects. It causes siltation of water and destruction of the river system, and sometimes it goes even to the ecosystem. So with the interference here was on a political level, just to say, extension officers, please leave people there, because sometimes politicians, they do it because they want the support of the people at the expense of...
Not sometimes, always, I think.
Yeah, always.
But they should take measures that aren't done with an eye on the electoral results, but with an eye on the environment.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the interference we are talking about. But sometimes they are not worried about the environment. They are worried about the support for the people.
Yeah.
And did you also give it to the local government in Mutare, this report, or will you give it?
We will.
Okay.
We are creating we will publicize it. We will publish it also in the local media in Mutare. After this debate, we will create a link through the local press. We will also publicize the document, so that's why we termed it an agenda setting, because we want people to take a debate and talk more about the issues of environment, even in Mutare. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then